This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Welcome to the Texas Land Guys podcast. So today we're going to be listening to part 2 of the interview that Tim and I had with Jon Pharris of CapRock. Last week's episode, great episode where Jon talked about just his background, getting into real estate, managing just a growing business, the GFC, getting married and starting a family and just everything related to that. So if you've not listened to that, I would definitely go back and check out that episode. Today's episode, we're going to get in more to the industrial market, Jon's outlook on the market, and he's also going to speak more to just kind of purpose and really finishes on a great topic that you definitely want to check out. So, Tim, anything you want to say about this second part?
I think you covered it. I think it was great. It's definitely more on the business side and kind of real estate side. I think the last one was very personal, and we're still going to get more of the personal story in this next episode, but he gets a lot more into just being a leader of a very successful company and the way that they have grown through the last decade and a half and the outlook on the future. So definitely worth a listen.
Do you want to talk about your investors? It's a good transition. Going from GFC in those early days to how you were able to build CapRock. And a huge part of that for any entrepreneur is having the capital behind you. And so how you got the capital behind you, was it early success on specific deals, or do you want to kind of get into that a little bit?
So when we started CapRock, it was Pat Daniels and I really literally dialing for dollars. I was in a cube, he was in an office, and we had a vision for what we wanted CapRock to be. And I will unpack that a little bit, but the short version of it is that we wanted CapRock to be doing exactly what it's doing right now, which is a fund manager that raises capital and is only focused on industrial and does both buy existing buildings and reposition them, which would be value add, as well as performs development, buys land and builds industrial buildings. And that was our end goal, was to have a company that looks very similar to what CapRock is today. Mm-hmm. And that was also my vision when I was 20 years old and I was at Princeton, and I was kind of creating my own personal business plan saying, I'm going to have a company. I'm going to start it when I'm in my mid 30s and I'm 20 years old when I'm saying that. And I want that company to be able to buy and build. And how do I get the necessary tools for me personally to be able to do that? So I created my own personal business plan. Like I said, started as a broker, then got my master's, then worked at a value add company, then worked at a development company. And everything was going mostly to plan, except that started CapRock because of the GFC when I was 29 instead of this fictitious mid 30s that I had when I was 20. But going back to CapRock, our goal is to buy and build. And when we started in 2009, we had no dollars. Pat is in his 60s. I'm in my 40s. But we did have the vision for where we were going to go. We started by buying non-performing notes secured by industrial buildings throughout California. So it could be up in the Bay Area, it could be in Southern California, but it was always buying industrial. And the way to buying industrial at that time frame, 2010, 11, 12, was actually buying the non-performing loans. So we would be buying paper, then we would restructure with the underlying owner, or we would foreclose, or sometimes they would just give back the keys. And that was the start of the business. And that was the opportunity set that was present in 2010, 11, 12. And then as the general economy improved, we went to more traditional value add, which was buying REO, buying vacant buildings, repositioning those. And at that point, we were all only in California. And then the market continued to improve and just the economy got better. So I saw a trend line happening a little bit earlier than others did, which was, I think development's going to come back. We're only in Southern California from a development standpoint at this juncture. And so in order to do development, obviously you need to have land. So we got out ahead of that trend in Southern California before I think a lot of the market started realizing that development could come back sooner than people expected. So we were fortunate enough to tie up hundreds of acres of land in multiple different locations throughout Southern California, predominantly in the Inland Empire, on long-term options in order to get the projects entitled. And in California, doing entitlement is very challenging. It can take years and years and years. And in some cases, it was ag land that we had to convert to industrial uses. In some cases, it's may have been no zoning. In other cases, we had to go through city annexations. So we looked at locationally the best properties, not necessarily the easiest ones. And because of our viewpoint of let's take on challenges, what's our expertise at that time, our expertise was really on entitlement. We were able to get phenomenal locations of land on favorable structural terms like option payments and long-term escrows because we were one of the first movers. And then the next 5-ish years, say starting in 2013 or something, the market continued to get better and it took 5 years to entitle these buildings and these projects and these millions of square feet. And by the time they're finally entitled, the market's back, they're valuable. We can either sell the land to another developer, we could bring in capital partners and develop those buildings. And we ended up doing both those strategies, kind of depending on the project. While we launched that development platform in 2013, we were also continuing to do value add projects. So then we had both platforms going really at full speed, which was the exact intent for CapRock Partners, because we didn't want to just be a development company because it's obviously very cyclical. And if you just do development, you're going to be riding waves that at some points are great and at other points the waves are crashing and you can get completely wiped out. And if you're just doing value add, you also miss the opportunities to really create opportunity and some income from the development side. And what we wanted to do was create a company that instead of going like this, kind of consistently went up and kind of took out some of the perceived risk in that. And at the beginning stages of CapRock Partners, it was really challenging to convince investors about that, especially the pension funds of the world, because they kind of look at the box, especially for a small company. Hey, you either do this or you do this. Why are you trying to do both? Are you going to strain your resources? Are you going to be successful at both? If they try and put you in a box, particularly when you're a small company, because up until late teens, we were 15 people, and then we went to 50 people. So there was a constant tension in the capital raising environment. So for roughly speaking, half of our company life, we were doing joint ventures with typical joint venture partners, kind of Wall Street banks, all the names that you would be familiar with, like a Carlyle or an Ares or a PIMCO, and lots of groups similar to that. And then in the later teens, we said, all right, we have a track record. We have some dollars saved. We can do a lot more CapRock co-investing into creating these funds. So then we kind of flipped the switch and started raising discretionary institutional funds from pension funds, university endowments, hospital systems, family offices, and other institutional investors. And so now we have a platform of value add, which is exactly what I just described. And then we also have a build a core platform, which is smaller, less investors who are writing larger checks that are global investors that in some cases want to hold these brand new assets for 20 plus years. And through both of those platforms, CapRock has acquired, developed, or entitled a little bit more than 35 million square feet. Our current portfolio, including our development pipeline, is around 22 million square feet. We are very active on both the buying of value add opportunities as well as buying land and developing new buildings. Last year, 2024, we were, for Southern California, we were finalists for Developer of the Year, and we were the winner of 2 Project of the Year awards for Southern California, which is, again, where we're headquartered in one of the more competitive industrial markets. So we've been successful on that avenue.
It's amazing. I mean, 15 years has flown by, I'm sure. And I'm sure when you think back, it's, it seems like a long time, like a lot of things, but then at the same time, you probably pinch yourself a little bit. And it's like, I can't believe that we're at this point. Like you can remember when you're cleaning out a warehouse or something and you're, just getting started and you're dialing for dollars and then now you're winning awards in one of the most, if not the most competitive industrial market in the country. That's pretty, it's like to actually sit and kind of think about that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we've been very blessed on that avenue, and you're bringing up cleaning out warehouses. So our very first deal, we started the company in 2009. Our very first deal was in 2010. And again, we had no money. And we bought non-performing loans, and literally on the weekends, Pat and myself, and then Pat's son and his friend were actually in a warehouse, sweeping the warehouse because it was a foreclosed building. The owner gave it back, but on his way of giving it back, he decided to trash the warehouse and leave a bunch of things. And what did we have to do? Like, wait, this is not our expectation when we bought the note and when we were working with them to, kind of hand back the keys. So we literally went up on a Saturday, had brooms, had U-Hauls, and taken out the trash. And I look back at that 16, 15 years from our first deal, and it's hilarious that was what we were doing at that point on the weekends. And just whatever it takes.
Yeah,
right?
whatever it takes. Yeah.
What a cool story, though. That's so cool.
Well, a great story to tell your kids too. Like you were saying, just that, it's the importance of hard work, the importance of doing what it takes, and not just expecting that. I think, like you said, going into a situation with expectations, and then when expectations don't align, we hear that a lot where it's like, well, this isn't what I was expecting. It's kind of like, I didn't know I had to pitch in and do something else. And it's like, that's just our life. We pitch in. I have 5 kids. Tim has 4. When you have 4 kids, it's like you're pitching in, doing all kinds of stuff all the time, as well as everything else in your life. And you can either like push back against that, or you can just realize that that's part of the joys of life, is being able to just get after stuff, and it's fun. So,
yeah, and it's also a season of life.
Yeah.
Right. So when your kids are really young and you're trying to start a company or whatever it is that you're working hard hours and long hours, then you come home and you're emotionally exhausted or physically exhausted, but you got to pour into your kids, because that's what's important. Because if you're just successful at the business world, but you're not successful in your family world, your personal world, your spiritual world, what's it for?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there are too many times where I think people just get focused on the business side, and then they neglect their family side,
mm-hmm.
and then their family falls apart. And then what's the point?
Yeah.
Right? And so a little aspect of that for CapRock is that we, when we travel, we try to have people only travel for one night and no more than 2 nights away. And that's a company ethos, and it's pretty easily done because we have multiple offices, and a lot of the deal people or development people are in those local offices. But the thought behind it is, hey, if you need to be present for your family, you need to be at a baseball game or a soccer game or whatever it might be, and also just physically present, you have to also work. So let's go away for one night and try and come back. That's really our goal, and our focus is never being away more than 2 nights from your family, because the longer you're away, there's drift that happens, or there's other subtle pressures or bad things could occur. And so just that's a little small way that we model it.
That's
really cool leadership, to encourage your employees that way and try and help support them in that. That's awesome.
So I was going to say, from here, kind of going into how COVID impacted CapRock. And then that sounds like that was around the time that you made the decision to move to Texas, or, I know it was after that, but I'm sure that thought maybe had started. So you want to kind of hit those 2 things, the impact of COVID, and was Texas already on the radar at that point? Or was that almost a result of just a lot of change?
So leading into COVID, CapRock, we had less than 20 employees, and we were just focused west of the Rockies. So we were doing deals in Salt Lake City and Seattle and Southern California and everything in between. And my view had often been to, let's expand beyond the Rockies, but let's make sure that our quote unquote home base is secure and our kind of our backyard. And as a result of many reasons, one of them very clearly being COVID, life was changing in California.
Mm-hmm.
And our kids were experiencing that change firsthand as a result of COVID and their friends and their sports and their school and all those types of things, which everybody is familiar with. So we don't have to go into that. But there was that aspect that was kind of put on our heart. The second one was California culturally was changing, and we were looking at the age of our kids and where will our kids end up potentially, and is this the right fit? So there's a personal aspect to that. And then the third aspect was as a company, we want to continue to grow. And what is another logical location for CapRock and for industrial? And very obvious, it's one of those locations could be DFW.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at Dallas and as such a strategic market, also a kind of a locals market in a certain extent where you need to really have a physical presence in Texas if you're going to be successful in Texas, in our viewpoint, versus in other markets you could kind of parachute in. You can fly to someplace in Nevada or someplace in Arizona because that's kind of what they expect culturally. They expect the capital to be flying in from other states into those types of markets. Very different viewpoint for Texas. Like you need to be in Texas, you need to be a Texan, you need to have that kind of viewpoint and those roots. So when we were talking about that expansion and taking all those things into account, rather than hiring a team and extracting them from a competitor or from a brokerage or from whatever it is and planting the CapRock flag, Pat and I thought it would be really important to be cultural carriers and to really set up the Texas office correctly. We needed to have either Pat or I move to Texas. And given my personality more on the entrepreneurial side and my stage of life and all those other things that I was just talking about, I raised my hand. I'm like, I'm ready to go. Let's figure this out. Let's take the next chapter and jump to Texas and jump into the DFW market. We had literally no ties to DFW. Wow. Like I had been to Texas just a handful of times in my entire life before then. And that also included driving across it from Princeton back to California 20 plus years ago and kind of praying about it and just taking a leap of faith, kind of being Joshua stepping into the Jordan River while the Jordan River's still flowing before it stops. Like that was a portion of our viewpoint. You have to be faithful. You have to take risks that are thought out and prayed about. And we made that plunge during COVID. And at that time for industrial, probably everybody remembers it because it's so nearby, it was incredibly frothy. Right? Cap rates were at all-time lows. Leasing was unbelievable. E-commerce was continuing this huge run. So the leasing velocity was very, very high, and everybody thought the trees were going to go to the sky, right? So that industrial values were going to go to X to 2X just every single year for forever. And starting the company in the GFC, we knew that was not right. It's cyclical. Anyone who says things aren't cyclical either hasn't been through a cycle or is blind. Yeah. And we were kind of looking at coming as the outsiders into the Texas market, and we meet with great brokers and they'd say, you should buy this. And I'm like, I own a calculator. There's no chance I'm buying this I'm at that pricing. And for a little while, we were scratching our head like, well, how can we enter the market at an appropriate basis, whether that's on land or buying existing buildings, because there was so much exuberance about industrial. And I just had the hunch and kind of being there before that something was going to change. So actually during that time frame, CapRock was net sellers across our platform. We were taking advantage of the froth. It was really hard for our acquisitions guys, for me as the CIO and kind of leading the acquisitions department to continually say, no, we can't buy this because I coined a phrase that these guys are losing money. They don't even know it yet when they bought an asset, and everyone would be giving high fives across the industry. Oh, that's just a great buy. And I'm looking at it saying, that makes no economic sense. The assumptions that they have on their cap rates, on their rental rate growth, it's not going to pencil. And as an industry, everyone gets excited about the acquisitions, but you can't have short-term thinking in a long-term asset. And everybody was having this short-term thinking. So we just flipped that playbook and played a little jiu-jitsu and said, hey, we're not sellers. We're going to hold back on buying during that time frame, whether that was in the West or in Texas. Obviously, we weren't sellers in Texas because we didn't have any assets. So all of our sales were in the West. And that completely repositioned our company for growth. We took advantage of the frothiness. And then in addition to that, during the COVID timeframe, we recapitalized our business from some of the short-term capital, where we were doing a lot of JVs with institutional capital partners who who are great partners, but it's also a short-term business plan.
Mm-hmm.
You got to buy the land, build the building, get out.
Mm-hmm.
You got to buy the building, fix it up, and get out, depending on the strategy. But our viewpoint was there are some great assets we want to own for 10, 15 years. How do we take advantage of just the capital, the liquidity in the marketplace, and align ourselves instead of with short-term capital with longer-term capital? So we raised a build-to-core fund, and we were able to execute on that strategy. And that's been very beneficial for CapRock and for our investors, because we weren't buying during the froth, and we were taking some of our assets that were high quality and kind of elongating the business plan to create stability for CapRock. Obviously, without knowing what was going to come, in a couple of years when interest rates went from 0 to essentially the highest amount of rate increases in history from a percentage standpoint. And our company was completely well positioned to be able to adapt at that. And now, the last 18 or so months, we've been buyers. It hasn't been great liquidity market for selling, but we already did our sales. So now we can take advantage of the kind of the brokenness in the market and be appropriately aggressive.
Before moving into what you're seeing in the industrial market and kind of looking forward, and then just some of the macro things going on, what was it like transitioning from California to Texas from a business standpoint? Because entitlements are very different, timeframes are very different, even probably just being so ingrained in California and then coming in, it's kind of the new guys to town to Texas. There are a lot of big development companies based here. And so you're competing, like you're saying. But was it more different than you expected, or were you pretty familiar with a lot of the differences that would be in place when you came from just a deal standpoint, a market timing standpoint, and just the way business is done here that's probably a little different than California?
So I love Texas. I'm not going back to California. That is our backyard, though, for our company, headquartered in Newport Beach. And the move to Texas personally has been great. Business-wise, it has been great. The biggest surprise to me was the quality of the competition and the quality of the brokers. We've been in lots of different markets, and the top brokers at any market are always incredibly sophisticated and very smart and entrepreneurial and just quote unquote get it. And that's the case in every single market. But then the next tier down in some markets, they're not the same caliber.
Yeah.
I would say in Texas, from top to bottom, the brokers here are very, very smart, very sharp. In addition to something that is not as expected from my background is they're collaborative a lot more. They're friendly a lot more. They share information appropriately a lot more. I think the quality of the brokers in Texas are from top to bottom are probably the best that I've experienced. Again, there's top brokers in every single market that are always at the top tier. So that was a refreshing change. Secondly, being an outsider, I'm coming in. They were very forthright in sharing kind of market trends, but they also give you a lot of macro information that you kind of have to parse through and make sure that you understand it. I've loved the move out here. The competition in Dallas and the competition in Southern California are equally robust. And one of the things I love about real estate, regardless of what market you're in, Arizona, California, Texas, the quality of the people are great. And so going back early in the podcast, the two things that I wanted to do growing up was real estate and Wall Street. I didn't like my experience at Wall Street because the culture was different. The people were different. The attitudes just didn't mesh with who I am. Real estate's not that way. Right? Real estate are great people, whether you're brokers or you're developers or you're even working with these top-notch tenants that we deal with. I love the industry.
Yeah. So I started in investment banking, which I think I told you previously. Similar experience. I don't think I was in it as long as you probably were, but then got into real estate, and it is a relational business. And in Texas, we're kind of known for having good relationships. And so there's obviously people you don't want to spend time with, but there's a lot of great people, like you're saying. And Houston has that. Dallas has that. There's the Dallas-Fort Worth competition and, don't like each other very much. And there's Houston and Dallas don't like each other very much. But at the end of the day, a lot of the bigger companies have offices in those different locations. They do collaborate. It is a really special industry to be in Texas.
Yeah, it's a friendly rivalry. It's a rivalry, but you're not going to stab each other in the back. You're gonna laugh behind their back, kind of thing. But but that is also what makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
How does an outsider try and create a company or presence in DFW, and then even within that, I kind of chose the other side of the Metroplex. Company is based in Fort Worth. I live in Fort Worth, where the epicenter is obviously Dallas, and so there's just fun challenges that go along with that. But I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people would say right now, and we can speak a little bit about the industrial market, that Fort Worth has a lot of opportunity on the industrial development side right now, even compared to Dallas. A lot of the developers we're meeting with are constantly saying they're interested in getting a project going in Fort Worth, maybe have or have not developed in Fort Worth, but just see the fundamentals out there, the growth, that market is really primed for more development. And I know you guys have been really active. Do you want to speak to just how you're seeing the market on both sides, the acquisition side, but also the development side in Texas?
Sure. So for Texas, our goal is to be active in every single major market. So Dallas, Houston, Austin, and then the border towns of Laredo and El Paso at the right volumes. And I would also want to include San Antonio in that kind of Austin, San Antonio mix as a general statement. Our vision for Texas is that we will be both developing and in buying. And we're nascent in the Texas market. So we only have a couple million square feet here. We are starting our first development project by the end of this year. And then we have our next one starting at the beginning of the following year. And we have other things in the pipeline. So we're off and running. Our viewpoint for industrial in Texas, and really more specifically in Dallas, is you have to be thoughtful about where you're building. Not trees don't always grow to the sky, which is I said that earlier about the experience that I had right at COVID. And so there's still pockets of overbuilding for sure in Dallas that have to be absorbed. And I'm saying Dallas is kind of a broader term, including DFW. And I think there's also been a fair amount of smaller buildings that have been in the pipeline or currently built and standing that need to be absorbed. So we're very optimistic on long-term for Dallas. I think right now is an opportunity to start positioning CapRock to have some larger land positions and to really kind of position CapRock for the next 5 years in Texas. And that's specifically what we're doing. Kind of taking the mentality that we had in the mid-teens in California and applying that here into Texas. We're also very active looking for our opportunities in the Houston area. And Houston has been phenomenal from a leasing velocity standpoint. More or less, it has the same amount of leasing activity as DFW, even though the market is 2/3 is the size. And then in every one of our markets, there are gaps where, hey, maybe there's way too many million square footers in a certain market, but in another market, there's not enough million square footers, or maybe there's a ton of buildings that are 200,000 square feet that can be divided and kind of shallow bay that can accommodate 4 or 5 tenants in a certain market, but there's almost none in another market. And when we have a broader perspective, like we do, in the sense that I'm CIO, so I see everything from Seattle to Texas to Southern California and everything in between, we can start seeing a lot more trends and wondering, gosh, why does this market have so much oversupply in the I don't know, say 1 million square footers, and other ones have almost none? Let's go after those other markets and just use the internal tools that we have to separate us from other groups. And then this isn't exactly what you were asking, but we're pretty quick on our decision making. We're a very streamlined company. And so we're constantly in the market. We have people in the air every single day, kind of the boots on the ground approach. And that allows us to have really significant information. So a small snippet of that is I was telling our investors this summer, especially at the early part of summer, that I felt like leasing velocity was coming back and that the headlines were overblown about the negativity of leasing and corporate decision-making, all with the exception that the Southern California market is still very slow on leasing. So I was excluding Southern California from what I was just saying. And we were actively negotiating lots of LOIs and leases with Fortune 100 type companies, but the market as a general statement wasn't seeing that. And investors had no idea because they were just reading Wall Street Journal or Green Street. And then just this week, what happens? Prologis says this is we're raising our forecast because leasing velocity is better. Green Street comes out and says there's a surprise index in industrial. And we were saying that 3 or 4 months ago and trying to position ourselves as a company to get ahead of that. And we've been successful in doing that. And I think that's the importance of having multiple locations and having boots on the ground in lots of different areas.
Yeah.
John, I was going to ask you, how do you see, I mean, this has been an interesting year geopolitically, and especially with tariffs kind of hitting in the springtime. And then even this week, there's been some new buzz with Trump and China and potential tariffs again in November. I know these are probably short-term issues and you're looking very long-term with a lot of your decisions, but how do you see that impacting the industrial market, or do you think it's going to really be much of an impact ongoing, or what are your thoughts there?
I think the tariffs are the fundamental issue for industrial real estate. There's somewhat of the unexpected result because historically, you'd say Southern California was the number one industrial market in the country because of the ports of LA Long Beach and the manufacturing that happens in Asia, and the fact that roughly half of the goods that come in the U.S. historically had come through those ports. But then now there's the tariffs, so the port volumes are very sporadic. In some months they're anemic, in other months they're trying to catch up for the next wave of tariffs. So it's a volatile time in that. I also think that Southern California is going to come back sooner than some people expect because there's been very much a lack of construction, and correctly so, that there's been a lack of construction because the leasing velocity is down. But in a land constrained market, the supply is going to get absorbed faster than people think, because people just say, hey, we have this much absorption, and they extrapolate that as if it's going to last forever. And for the next 6 years, it's only going to have this much leasing, instead of understanding the spikes. So I think Southern California is going to come back sooner than people expect. And again, we're trying to position CapRock to take advantage of that. The other thing about tariffs, I think it's actually in certain ways really helpful for the industrial market because there's another demand driver. All of a sudden there's more manufacturing, there's some more nearshoring or onshoring, which everyone in the audience is already familiar with. So don't want to go through that in too much detail. But the unexpected kind of hurdle that every industrial developer is facing is kind of two things. One, what are the cities going to allow from an entitlement perspective, and those entitlement hurdles that everyone faces? And the second one is power. And that power, we're not even talking about data center power because that's sucking out a lot of the power because it's going into those aspects. But if we want to have a bunch of manufacturing coming back stateside, well, those manufacturers require power. And even if we're talking about a typical industrial use, not a data center use, that lead time for sufficient power depends on your market, but it's a minimum of 1 year. And sometimes it's 3 or 4 years, again, depending on the market, depending on how much power you want. And then you add in the data center demand that is unprecedented, and who knows how long that goes. Is this the beginning of it, or is this a frothy market? That's not my expertise, so I don't want to go into it. But that is another major hurdle that the U.S. is facing in conjunction with those tariffs. The tariffs are partly to bring manufacturing and bring production stateside, but you have to look at it holistically. Well, if we're going to do that, what other things need to also occur in order to facilitate additional onshoring?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a great point.
When you're thinking about the future of industrial, and it's gone through so many changes just in the last 15 years since you started CapRock, in thinking about, you mentioned earlier, career-wise, maybe another 15, 20 years doing something similar to what you're doing. How do you see Texas over that period of time? Because you're saying really bullish long-term on Texas. Texas is kind of a place, if we try to fast forward to almost the year 2050, just as a company where you guys really think Texas is, we're positioned now, but positioned to be in the next 20 years or so?
I get that question a lot because I think mostly from investors. They see, hey, why did the co-founder move from California to Texas? And what are some of the factors? We've already talked about a couple of them. But my viewpoint is I believe so much in Texas, I moved my whole family to Texas. And this is where I live, and I'm never moving back to California. And we love it here. And when you look at kind of the macro trends, right, you're going to have, from an industrial standpoint, you're going to have a presence if you're a company on the West Coast. You're going to have a presence as a company on the East Coast. You're probably going to have multiple of those. And then you obviously need to have something in the Midwest. And from just a high level philosophy, is it going to be the Illinois, Chicago area, or is it going to be the DFW, Texas, Houston area? And my bet is it's going to be Texas. And when I made the move 4 or 5 years ago, people often said, well, why didn't you just move to Chicago? Because at that point, Chicago was had a larger industrial base. There's lots of reasons that I didn't move to Chicago. I'm not going to go into those. But I so much believe in Dallas and DFW as an engine for economic growth for the entire country that we moved here. And I'm very bullish on what's going to happen in Texas over the next 20 years. I think Texas specifically is going to be the heartbeat of America.
Yeah. Well, Tim and I definitely believe that. And we're fortunate. I think all the time, we're so fortunate we're land brokers in Texas.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe what you said earlier just about brokers in Texas that you've interacted with is we've experienced so much growth as a state. And so getting to be a broker in real estate, you get to be involved in so many transactions. And the positive business climate that we're in, where zoning and entitlements and just deal velocity and activity, you have brokers that getting involved like I did right out of the GFC, just gotten to see incredible amounts of activity. And so obviously that's just going to raise the level of competition and the quality of the different brokers, just going to be involved in so many transactions. But to see the stats and the projections that the Texas Triangle, the major cities in Texas, will be kind of the most populous cities, the projection is, in the United States by the end of the century, is amazing. To pass New York and LA. And if that actually happens, which we have the land for it. So if it actually happens, that'd be pretty incredible.
Like I said, I think Texas is the heartbeat of America. And especially as you go out in more decades from now with other issues that other states are facing and the policy choices that they're making or have made. The amazing thing about Texas is that it is really, I think, the land of opportunity right now, where you have can-do people, you have can-do cities, you have obstacles that everybody faces, but the mentality is, hey, let's go figure that out. Let's go make that happen. Versus other places are, no, that's just not going to work, or you can't even get a response. And the helpfulness, the attitude, the can-do spirit, the entrepreneurial edge, what made America great is so prevalent in Texas. And that is one thing I love about it.
Yeah. So as we're kind of coming to a close and wrapping up, I thought it'd be good to finish on purpose, which we talked a little bit about that earlier, and just, what matters and our significance. But when you're thinking about where you are in your career and legacy and thinking about kind of the whole person, like we talked about earlier, what are just some of the things you're thinking about now that you are established in Texas? CapRock's at the point it's at. Your kids are getting older. You got a kid in college now, and just kind of the life stage you're at. So just, looking forward, I know you said you and your wife are going to do the master's program together, kind of go that through together. It'll be your second time. Just some of the legacy questions and thoughts you're probably having now at this stage in your life.
I don't realize I was that old, but okay. No.
As you look into the end, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Like I said earlier, I got a long time with CapRock, and I'm very blessed to have great partners and a great company and great team on doing what we've been successful at doing, and continuing to grow CapRock for quite some time in the future. But going back to your point, as we have a different life stage with people going in, kids going into college, that just is a natural reflection point about, am I doing all the right things? Am I using my time wisely? How am I growing personally with my family, with my kingdom, with my business, kind of all the aspects of life. And as a result of that transition, I decided to go back through the master's program, and this time with Ashley, and do it as a joint exercise, realizing that there are different chapters in everybody's life. I am not leaving the chapter that I'm currently in, but you always want to be preparing for the future. And so we just started the master's program again this year. This time we're doing it together because you're a family unit, a marriage unit, and Ashley and I want to be aligned on what God has in front of us, what we think we're being called to do. We don't have any future aspirations right now, but we know that God wants to prepare us for whatever it might be that he's going to unveil in the future. And if we're not taking the next steps at any stage of our life, then we're never going to be prepared for the next thing. And that's just probably a kind of a strategic viewpoint that I have in general. So while we don't know what the future holds, we don't know what the next thing is, we want to be preparing for that. And the same thing we talk about with our kids, right? You're raising kids. They don't know the next, what's going to happen in the next year. They don't have a broader vision. So it's your job as a parent to kind of prepare them as best you can for whatever might be ahead. Taking a similar philosophy, we know that there's going to be something different in the future. Let's prepare as a family. Let's prepare as a marriage to understand what that might be, what our unique giftings are. And then, the Bible says two become one. So she has certain strengths that might be my weaknesses and vice versa. And let's figure out exactly what those are so that we can be as compatible as possible in order to leverage the united gifts that we have to make an impact on whatever might be coming our way.
You want to talk at all about, I know you talked a little bit about Ashley, but just the importance of your marriage when you're growing a business, when your kids are growing up, and just that, I think for a lot of people, unfortunately, you see a lot of marriages not last and a lot of marriages fall apart. And there's a lot of reasons why that can happen. But on the other side of that, you and Ashley and your marriage, and then just at this point, be married 23 years and being on the same page to say, let's go do this together. This would be really good to go do together now as we look forward. Just the importance of having her like on your team, like you said, you guys are one. Just kind of speak to that a little bit.
I've been very blessed to have met Ashley when we were both 20 and dated for a few years while we were finishing school, and got married kind of right out of school a year after for me. And a lot of my friends thought I was crazy at the time. Right? I was 23 when I got married, and we're like, well, why are you doing that so early? And you have your whole life and all that kind of thing. But also from just my personality is, this is the right thing to do. Like, I'm going to avoid some of those other noises or the cultural, and Ashley's the right one. So get married earlier. And I kind of feel like that trend is actually coming back around a little bit more now, where people are getting married earlier. But more to answer your question about how important marriage is, I would not be who I am without Ashley. She has taken on an incredible amount of work and burden on raising the 4 kids. And she also homeschooled them for many years. So we have a lot of unique aspects about who she is. And then that has made me a better person, made me a better dad, helped with CapRock. So for sure, nothing would be done without Ashley. But then I think she has amazing gifts, and she has been using those gifts for our family. And now that our family is just continuing to get older, which is great, I think she's going to be used in some ways that are unexpected, that I don't even know what they are. And going through the master's program is just a way to make sure everybody is aligned. And then what your point too about how do you create a healthy marriage while there's some stressors going on in life. I would say 2 things kind of stand out besides the being equally yoked, which in our view would be fundamental. First one was my partner, Pat Daniels, who is older than I am and has kind of gone through a few ups and downs and the economy and everything along those lines. But my family traveled a fair amount. So we had a place up in Idaho, and nothing glamorous, but we would spend summers there, and we would ski as much as we could in the winter. And so we had built-in family time, and I would fly back and forth wherever it was, because at that time my role could have been on the moon as long as I had a phone and the internet and doing deals. So I could do that kind of anywhere. But that also built in really intentional time as a family and as a marriage. And then the second aspect of that is pouring into your wife and your kids all the time, right? There's some philosophies that say, oh, you just have to have high impact time with your kids. And I don't agree with that at all. Like, yes, you have to have a high impact time for your kids. You have to coach them. You have to do intentional dates with them, but you also have to physically be there. And that means that there are certain stages of your life where you have to put limits on your career, at least in my view. And so, hey, maybe we could have gone to Texas earlier. Maybe we could have expanded to other markets faster. But if I did that, then I would have had a toll on my little kids. I would have had a toll on my marriage. So there were intentional aspects that we didn't talk about in this conversation where I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I wanted to intentionally limit the career in order to make sure that I had a healthy family life. I could have definitely been gone more. I definitely could have traveled internationally and gotten different capital sources or things similar to that. But I made conscious decisions to say, no, that is not the stage of life for myself, for my family, and if that limits CapRock, so be it. But that's a chapter of life for CapRock and for my marriage and for my kids. And I don't want to miss that chapter.
And it's probably the best. Sorry, Tom was going to say it's probably the best thing for CapRock long term. Even it's kind of ironic, but making those choices and being wise and being so healthy in your marriage and your family can give you a much longer run with CapRock than if you just made the short term decisions. We got to do this, we got to get to this level in this amount of time. Could have been very short sighted because maybe you would have had some bigger success earlier on, but then you could have had bigger problems later too. And even just, like we said earlier, you can have great success, but if your family's falling apart, or even if it's not falling apart, but there's not a strong marriage and a strong, family relationship with your kids, you're missing out on that joy. That's really empty. At some point, doing another deal, if that's all it is, becomes super empty if there's nothing else to life than that. So,
yeah, I think in a lot of ways, as you were talking, I was thinking back to the master's program, but what we say no to is defining who we are, because we can't just say yes to everything. And so it starts with what is your priority, what's most important, and then you're going to have to say no to different parts of your life. And a lot of people are choosing to say yes to everything that's career. I'll always say yes, and I'll do that. But then if you're saying that, you're actually, without maybe even realizing it, saying no to something else. You could be saying no to your marriage or no to your kids, or and I think I've talked about before on the podcast, but I listened to Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank talk about his life and kind of selling himself to success and how he just wasn't there for his kids. And sadly, he was kind of like, well, I have a good relationship with them now and I don't regret it at all. It's kind of the place he's at. But to me, that was so sad and so empty, because it'd be interesting to actually talk to his kids and find out what his kids really think about the fact that he was just never there. Kids, he's like, well, I gave them a great life. I gave them everything they needed. I gave them all the money. But I think we all know that's, those are nice to haves, but that's why people are depressed. That's why people are struggling. It's not because they don't have things. It's because they don't have relationships. They don't have, maybe their dad or their mom involved in their life. And so you have to be able to say no to things to say yes to the things that really matter. And it's going to maybe look like a limitation, but I think what's neat about it is God's really blessed CapRock and really blessed you guys. And so like Tim said, I think that's what's been best for CapRock is having that focus. And from what you said earlier about your culture, it's everything who you guys are. Is you want to hire people now that have that kind of character, that have that kind of mindset. It's just a continuation on of the legacy of what CapRock was built on. But if you're not doing that as a leader and setting that example, you're not going to have people that are following that either.
I have nothing to add to that. Perfect.
Well, Jon, thanks for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to share? Or, I think this was a great conversation. And Tim and I were talking earlier. We were like, this could probably be one of those like Joe Rogan, like 4 or 5 hour conversations, because there's so many things we can relate on with starting companies and businesses. And our we didn't mention it, but our family's from California. So Tim was actually born out in Southern California. So there's just a lot of, connections we have, and we've talked about a lot of those. But anything you want to share, add?
I think this was a wide-ranging conversation and kind of interwove so many different aspects of someone's lives and how we collectively view success. And so it's been great. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. It was awesome.
Thank you.
So we talked about a couple things on the podcast. The Barnabas Group. Is there anybody that could be reached out to for that, or anywhere to go for that yet? Or are we a little bit early? That's something we could always add later.
Yeah, let's add that later, because it's just at the early stages of getting relaunched in DFW, and want to make sure that it has a proper foundation, and then let it grow.
For sure. And we've talked a lot about the master's program, which is run by Jeff Gerhardt now, and he lives in McKinney, so he's in the DFW area. Yeah.
And so if you have any interest in the master's program, definitely reach out to, obviously Google it and find it, or reach out to any of us that are on the podcast, because we've all been through it. And if you're in the right mind and you feel like God's calling you in that way and you have the right faith and tradition, to absolutely look into it, because I think it is one of the singular most impactful things that somebody can do. And while it may have originally been geared for people who are transitioning from like a a career to a midpoint in their life. As we all talked about, we all went through it in our 20s. And I think it's great to do it in the earlier stages of your life because it will impact you for the next 40, 60 years, depending on when you go through the program. And it's better to do that early rather than late.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you for listening today. It was a great conversation with Jon. We'll have to have you back on because I think we could go for longer. But thanks again for being willing to come on, and we're excited to have you back.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jon.
Well, Tim, that was a great wrap up to this second part episode with Jon. I felt like we probably could have gone a lot longer, like we said when we were talking to Jon. He's just such an interesting guy. He's been so successful. We were joking afterwards when we stopped the recording that we didn't even get into the fact that he said he was the number 3 goalie in the entire country for water polo and could have been on the Olympic team had he prioritized that and probably gone to Stanford. But I mean, Princeton, USC grad degree, just such an impressive guy, but also such a humble guy. And getting to sit here and talk to him and interact with him, that was a lot of fun.
I love just hearing about his leadership and patience with CapRock, going through the different cycles and always thinking ahead, being prepared for the future, not just doing what everybody else was doing in the moment and following kind of the herd, which we see so often with developers of just jumping on the bandwagon and following everybody else. He chose to be very deliberate and I think very, very wise in how he approached things. And then also love just hearing his commitment to his family and limiting potential success, which I think is so hard as an entrepreneur and as a leader of a company to try and be there for his wife and his kids. I thought that was awesome, really encouraging and really, really challenging.
Well, thanks for listening to the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. So send us an email, texaslandguys@dmre.com. Follow us on LinkedIn. If you have questions about land that you own, whether you're a landowner and you want us to give you a free valuation and tell us our thoughts just on the marketability of it, the timing to take it to market, or the value, reach out to us. And if you're a developer like Jon, CapRock's been a great client of ours. We enjoy working with them. Reach out to us and we can give you an overview of the market and talk about just where it might make sense to look for your next development. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.